how to arrange this.
I have the challenge of chairing a wrap-up session at the end of a long and very full day. My head is still spinning. And so, fortunately, we have three provocative and very good observers who have been taking some notes and are going to share with us just some of their thoughts on what they heard today. And so I've talked with them about asking them to reflect on two questions, and one additional question has just been added. So, the first one is what resonated? Of what you heard today, what resonated well with your experience, the kinds of things that you have been engaged in your own work, or your own experience with working with the marginalized and extreme poor? Then, what was new? What got you thinking in a slightly different direction? What will you tell a colleague when you leave here, or what was new out of what you heard? And then the third question that Joachim suggested, that I think is a very good one, is what are the implications for tomorrow when we discuss the interventions and instruments for addressing poverty? So without further ado, Mahabub, you're sitting closest to me, so why don't you...
First, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Jeff for inviting me to come to this roundtable discussion. This is basically a learning lesson for me. I am now a development administrator. So my thinking power has been substantially reduced, and this has been a long day. And at this age, I don't know how much I could have sort of captured. And the time is about some minutes or 7 minutes, okay?
5 to 7.
Yeah. I think we are reminded about the title of the seminar, of the roundtable conference, Marginality and Extreme Poverty Towards Inclusive Development for and with the Poorest. We have seen that these concepts, marginality and extreme poverty, has been used interchangeably. In the afternoon about the interventions, it was almost exclusively on the extreme poverty, sort of looking at the thing from the extreme poverty. In the morning, we had discussions about the concepts and focused more on the marginality and others. So I'd like to take this point that Joachim mentioned in the early morning, is the cause and effect kind of sort of issues, that the issue of causality. Sort of listening through and thinking through my sort of process of digestion, I would like to consider marginality as the state of affairs of development intervention. This is a cause, and extreme poverty is the impact of the marginality. So the marginality would be the cause, and others, and extreme poverty would be the effect of the marginality in that sense. So if we think of development interventions just looking at extreme poverty, we'll just address the symptoms. That will be on the curative. Once the disease has been done, you want to sort of address them. I think it might be better to sort of look at it from the marginality point of view, because then you'll be going for preventive kind of measures so that extreme poverty doesn't occur to that sense. So that's something about the new that you have mentioned on that. In one presentation, I like this concept of when you define marginality about the center and periphery argument. I think during our young ages, we sort of gone through development literature about center and periphery, and the distance and other things. So I think marginality in the context of that, it's at the border of the situation, at the periphery of the situation, and if you have longer distance from the center, there is a high probability that those people who are at the periphery would be, there is a high probability that they will be excluded. So the exclusion comes from that development intervention. Now, why that is so, sort of marginality in that context? It might occur, as we are told that obviously this is about people living at the margin of economic, social, political, and ecological systems. So they are the periphery of those systems that we have talked about. It sort of reminds me that, particularly if we look at the two organs of the state, one is the government and the other is the corporate sector or private sector who provides services. The government obviously taxes the relatively better off sections of the society and undertakes public expenditure in order to cover the weaker sections of the society, particularly in areas where the private sector would not venture in, what you call public goods kind of sort of areas. There the marginality occurs because of different kind of situations. One would be that for the state to provide, for the government to provide public goods, you need to have a critical minimum sort of efforts in order to provide those services. So those who are at the margin where there is not that critical minimum, I think the geographers use that concept very well, that it won't be sort of economic to provide those services. So those people who are at the margin, then they are left behind by the government kind of services. So that would be one, that like very remote areas, there is no possibility of setting up a school because you don't have you don't have the critical minimum number of students and all those kind of sort of issues that are there. So that could be sort of one marginality. The second would be the administration, the government sort of efficacy of the government servants, the bureaucrats and others. They would like to have much more comfort, so they would like to serve people who are near the center rather than making a discomfort and go to further distances, to serve those, because then you have additional disutility of providing those services and you may not have the incentives in the government system to do that. So there would be people who would be out there, and there are examples of the government having good sort of hardware facilities with regard to health clinics, hospitals and others, but you don't have the software, you don't have the medical sort of professionals serving those areas. So that's the other one. And then there will be socially and politically excluded because you don't have the necessary near to the power structure and others. Now with regard to the corporate sector, the private sector, there are market failures because the poor, the marginal people may also demand services, but the corporate sector might think that the market is too small, it is too risky, or they will not be able to pay the price at which they can serve the relatively better off sections of the society. So there is a market failure there, and you need to sort of design a system. These days we call about social enterprises by the civil society and others to address those systems. So if you look at the civil society, they are addressing some of those kind of marginality areas by providing, extending services for healthcare to the marginal people, addressing the education and others for the tribal areas and indigenous communities, ecological marginality about the external events that cause vulnerability and others and how to address those. I think these are the development interventions that we think about when we think about marginality. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. We'll go on down the road. Prabhu, do you want to?
Thanks, Ruth. I haven't been taking copious notes as you falsely advertised.
Mental notes.
But just a couple of comments. One thing that I was struck with earlier in the day and kind of puzzled about it and said, what? Was when somebody said, the MPG goal of 50%, well, that's too small a goal. Why don't we do 70, 80%? And why are we focusing on harvesting low-hanging fruit. And I said, we haven't even harvested the low-hanging fruit. Let's get on with harvesting the low-hanging fruit first before you complain about focusing on low-hanging fruits. The reason I say that is the Green Revolution itself was a harvest of low-hanging fruit. But it had such an enormous benefit from that harvest. My complaint of the Green Revolution is that after that they didn't go further and capture even more difficult harvests. Okay. So I think we need to say where there is ability to do something quick, let's just do it. And let's benefit people who can get the benefit from that. So that's one point I'd like to make. I thought listening to much of the discussion today, especially this afternoon, also the later part of the morning, is I see that there's a lot more efforts that have been made to segment populations, segmentations in terms of ultra poor, subjective poor, and that classifications, and quite a bit of efforts made at segmenting different types of marginality. And I think that's a good starting point for informing our discussion and for targeting interventions as we look ahead. But I was also worried I can totally understand the argument that marginality is not a unidimensional concept, that it's multidimensional, and that we need to have a composite view of marginality which takes into account economic, ecological, social marginality, exclusion issues, etc. I totally understand that. But I'm worried that by trying to be comprehensive, we may lose our ability to intervene. For example, if I want to understand the magnitude of the problem of drought and target technological interventions to alleviate the problem of drought in farming systems in Africa, for example, then I would really like to know drought. I'd like us to be able to segment farming systems by farming systems that are drought prone relative to farming systems that are not drought prone. Areas where those populations living in areas which are prone to drought relative to areas where they're not prone. Then I am much better at saying the returns to investments in drought tolerant maize varieties is so much. Now there will be a poverty reduction benefit from that. I may not be addressing the problems of the ultra poor, but I'm definitely addressing the problems of drought. And so one needs to have a certain level of disaggregation in marginality indicators so we can target the right interventions to the right populations. At the same time, if I'm addressing an intervention around safety nets, then I would like to know who are, within a particular region, who are the real ultra poor who have lack of access to assets of any sort, and that they're the ones that I need to target my safety net interventions to. So my plea, I guess, is while being comprehensive is very useful, let's try to figure out a way that we can have disaggregated sets of indicators that can be used for purposes as necessary, and then look for ways in which you can aggregate upwards if that's feasible also. I'm not sure I've made enough sense around that, but that's where I'd like to stop.
I think it's always good on the end of the first day that there's still a few things that haven't all become clear, because that draws people back to the second day, right? And now, Assifa.
Thank you very much, but I'm a bit lost, I mean, speaking after seasoned speakers, I think it's very difficult. I think you understand. I don't think I'm going to add value to what they have already said. Well, let me try. Well, I think when Joachim asked me to be part of this project, the first question I asked him was, what do you mean by marginality? I mean, how is this a problem? I mean, there is no systematic marginality in Ethiopia. I mean, where is the issue? I mean, that was the kind of thing that I really raised initially. And now I think I learned a lot, and I think I was wrong in my perception about the whole issue of marginality. So I think this forum, I think, was able to provide us with excellent papers, excellent presentations, and show us the complexity and the multidimensional nature of the issue. But I tend to agree with Pingali about the intervention. I think, I mean, we have already several interventions in place in many countries, and I think what we don't know now is, what is working and what's not working. I mean, how are these interventions affecting the extreme poor? I mean, there were general interventions regarding women, children, disabled, marginally disadvantaged regions. I mean, here and there, you name it, in all places, I guess. But I think what we don't know is really down there on the ground, what has really worked and what has not worked, and what can be really improved in these interventions is, I think, a very critical issue that probably is important to look into more deeper and disaggregated level of information. I think we have a lot of gap, information gap and knowledge gap in this area, and I think from the discussion that we had this morning and this afternoon, my take is that it is complex, but in order to identify the appropriate intervention levels, we need first of all to take stock of what has already worked on the ground. I think this is, in my opinion, very critical and very useful in general. And I think interventions that are more or less rural-based interventions work more in a more satisfactory manner than other interventions, in my opinion, because that's, I mean, all the data shows that you have most of the poor are located in rural areas or in geographically isolated areas. So I think rural-based interventions are, in my opinion, would be the way forward in the future. And I think the last question which Joachim added, which says what have we learned for tomorrow, the lessons for the interventions, is that I think we need to think of instruments, and when you think of instruments, I think on the one hand we want to have simple instruments that can be delivered, that can be effective. On the other hand, we need to be also comprehensive as much as possible. So creating a balance between this, and that's what I think Pingali was referring to, is a major challenge for policymakers and for academics. And one last thing is, I don't think we have discussed much on the political economy side of the whole issue. Yes, the presentation with Conrad has given us some picture, but I think, what should really policymakers do in terms of really targeting these figures? What are the variables? I mean, is it election? Is it something else that drives the decision of policymakers? The political economy side of this thing, I don't think it has had enough discussion in this today in general. I think that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there others who have burning comments that they'd like to add on this? Yes, Sudarshan, and then David.
Yeah, very briefly, when I look back at the day, I felt that one of the things perhaps we didn't delve deep enough into is the causal part of marginality. And it gets more pronounced when we kind of fairly conclude that it's more pronounced in the rural context. So there must be a pattern or there must be a context to it as to why marginality is more in the rural context and what gave rise. And if we haven't focused on this, I think the choices of our interventions would be kind of conditional or limited. They would have to be in the context of when we relate this. The second thing I just wanted to kind of mention in passing was the post-lunch session. I thought the aspirational aspect was kind of passed by in the context. We dwelt a lot on the subject, but I think it's almost, I mean, one would be almost concluding that for marginal people, aspirational rights are not there. I mean, since we didn't focus and bring out, it seemed that perhaps we would condition ourselves to suboptimal solutions for them, that they wouldn't be contemporary or they wouldn't be looking ahead. Thank you. These were the 2 points.
Okay, some very quick points. The first one is Assifa's point. I think tomorrow we'll have to, when we're looking at interventions, look more at political economy and not the politics of intervention, because many of the governments we're going to be talking about, actually, they know quite well where marginalisation is. They know where these populations are, but you don't need to worry about them, or you can treat them in different ways. So I think we've got to get more political in that. The second thing maybe builds on Sudhashen's point. Think about rights today, but what's really been missing is the agency of the poorest. Very poor people are working like hell with their own strategies. That just hasn't come through. This has come through as a technical elite diagnosing which leverage we can find to get through. And we've somehow got to get, I think, the agency of the poorest through there. The final thing is a sort of dilemma that I face myself. I can sort of recognise the agricultural, but I find it really difficult to separate the urban from the rural nowadays. Because when I go to remote parts of northern Bangladesh, people are getting remittances from Dubai and New York and on the mobile. And this is constructed as a rural project, but rural life is all about the interactions with the urban. And if you are looking at the marginalised, then there are quite significant numbers of marginalised in urban areas nowadays, and the future of marginalisation, maybe in a generation's time, is going to be in urban areas. So I come out of a rural development background and that, but I find the rural very difficult to work with. So I think we need to fit the urban in some way, or forget the rural, because we can't define it very easily.
Good. Any others? Oh, yes, Joy.
Thank you very much. I think we've had very interesting discussions today, but I haven't heard something that I was hoping to hear. The perception of marginality by the marginalized themselves. I mean, for example, there are those who know they're marginalized, that what they have is worse than what they should have. Maybe they have no access to water, they can't go to school, they have no health, and they know it, and they are complaining about it, and they're not happy about it. But this other group of people, consider this story about a tourist in Mombasa who finds a native sleeping under a mango tree, and he asks the native, "What are you doing under the mango tree?" And he says, "I'm waiting for the mango to fall." He says, "Why?" "Because it will surely fall and I will have a mango." "Go for it." He says, "What for?" "Because that way you will be able to get your mango and move on to something else." "What for?" "That way you can make more for yourself." "What for?" So the thing is, there are those who see it as a fate, the way a curse, something that they have to live with, and they're not complaining about it. In other words, I did not hear about the role of civil society in tackling such issues, because probably only them can be able to deal with attitudes towards marginality. Thank you.
Well, this round of final comments picked up on what I was trying to knit together quite nicely. I was struck this morning by, and also in reading the background paper, about this analogy of the knot. And it's a complicated knot, and pulling the wrong string can make it worse. But also, so therefore, this need for understanding of the knot. And I think today there was some discussion a lot more about not just data, but knowledge and understanding being needed, and multifaceted kind of approach. And also this discussion about the balance between knowledge and interventions that we heard from our three panelists. I think as we move into discussion of interventions, getting at the issue of power relations is going to be very important. In many cases, it is, it is something. What is keeping them poor? Distance or whatever. But in other cases, it is someone that is keeping them poor. And we have to recognize that. But at the same time, David, your point about agency, when Andreas said he cringes anytime he hears that term, they were graduated out of poverty, that passive voice. Personally, I would be really happy if I never again hear that they were lifted out of poverty, because from what I've seen, the heavy lifting is done by the people themselves, and it's more a matter of providing them the steps to get out. So I'm hoping that tomorrow we can move forward with some of these kinds of rich discussions further. Joachim, I turn it back to you for reactions, comments, and way forward.
Now let me just thank you, Ruth, and the three panelists and our speakers for contributions. This was packed, marginal, managed to find. Tomorrow is more 9, agenda we end at 5. Tomorrow to 5. It happens at an institute. Could I have fans interest to the Beethoven Power evening? Just for 6. We don't fully get music until then. So I count 3 or 5 of 10, 12. Is the session as interesting? Let me to the dinner this evening, dress nice food. You all have